The Silent Truth. Chapter 1. It had started off like any other day at Horizon Tech, a cutting-edge innovation company known for developing advanced AI and neuroscience technology. Michael Stewart, a senior scientist at the company, was preparing for an important presentation to showcase a new device they'd been working on for months. The device, known as Echo, was meant to be a revolutionary breakthrough in mind-reading technology, able to transmit thoughts from one person to another with unprecedented clarity. Michael had always been cautious about the ethical implications of such technology, but the excitement of being on the cusp of history outweighed his concerns. His colleague, Jane Nielsen, an expert in neuroscience, was on his side. She saw Echo as a tool to bridge communication gaps, especially for those who couldn't speak or were locked in their minds due to injuries or illnesses. As Michael stood in front of the team in the lab, he gestured to the sleek, silver headsets that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. Jane adjusted her glasses and took notes, her mind already racing with the possibilities. "Today, we'll begin testing Echo's full capabilities," Michael announced, looking at the other researchers. "But I must remind everyone that this is still a prototype. There may be some unforeseen consequences." Toby Samuel, the company's head of security, was skeptical as always. He crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. Consequences? Like what? People accidentally transmitting their passwords or something? Sparrow Nichols, a hacker and part-time consultant for Horizon Tech, snorted from the corner. "That's the least of your worries, Toby. You're more likely to accidentally hear people's intimate thoughts. Or worse, what if it pulls something from deep in the subconscious that they didn't even know was there?" Toby raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure I want to be in the room if that happens." Michael and Jane exchanged glances. They hadn't fully tested Echo with multiple people connected at once. The last thing they wanted was to risk someone hearing too much, too soon. The first test was a simple one. Jane volunteered to wear the headset, and Michael, as the operator, connected his own headset. As they sat down, the room grew tense. Michael activated the device, and the two of them began their experiment. At first, nothing unusual happened. Michael could hear Jane's thoughts, fragmented and unclear. He could tell she was focused on a series of calculations, working through data in her mind. But then, things began to shift. The room seemed to pulse with energy, and Michael's vision blurred. He couldn't understand why, but suddenly he was hearing thoughts that weren't Jane's. It was like the device had tapped into an unintended frequency, one that stretched far beyond their intended connection. A voice, calm yet distant, filled his mind. "They don't know what they're doing. It will be too late by the time they realize the consequences." Michael shook his head. Was it his imagination? He focused back on Jane's thoughts, trying to block out the intrusive voice. But the words kept coming, growing louder. "I've been waiting for this moment. They've opened Pandora's box." "Michael?" Jane's voice cut through his internal chaos. "Michael, are you okay?" He blinked and looked at her. Her eyes were wide with concern. He took a deep breath. Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little disoriented." "Maybe we should stop the test," Jane suggested. "There's something wrong with the connection." Michael nodded and quickly deactivated the device. The strange voice faded away, but his heart was pounding. "You're right. We need to figure out what just happened." That night, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. He stayed late at the lab, reviewing the data. But there was nothing in the logs to explain the voice or the strange thoughts he'd experienced. It was as though Echo had tapped into someone, outside of the intended range. Suddenly, an email pinged on his screen. It was from an anonymous account with the subject line, "They know you're listening." The message was brief but chilling. "You're playing with fire. Echo is already beyond your control. You'll regret this. We are watching." Michael stared at the screen. It couldn't be a coincidence. Someone had somehow accessed the Echo network from outside the lab. He turned to his phone and called Jane immediately. "Jane, we need to talk," he said urgently. "I'm already on my way," she replied. When she arrived at the lab, Michael was pacing. "Someone else is using Echo," he said. "They're in our system, and they're manipulating it." Jane's face went pale. "How is that even possible? We've sealed the network." Before Michael could answer, the lights in the lab flickered, and a voice, clearer this time, rang out in both their minds. I warned you. Now, you'll understand. The truth cannot be silenced. It was the same voice from earlier, but now it was stronger, more insistent. Jane clutched her head, and Michael staggered backward. The voice continued, now filling the room with an almost physical presence. You were never meant to unlock this. It wasn't Echo you should have been listening to. It was me. Suddenly, the power surged, and the screens flickered to life, showing a strange, cryptic message. Your minds were the key, but you're not the only ones with access. Michael realized with horror that they had unwittingly opened a gateway to something far darker than they could have imagined. The true potential of Echo wasn't just reading minds, it was sharing them. And somewhere, out there, a mind had latched onto theirs, using the technology to infiltrate their thoughts and control them. As the lights went out, Michael looked at Jane. We need to find out who this is before they take everything from us. And so, their battle began. Not just against a rogue hacker or a malfunctioning machine, but against something far more dangerous. A mind that could control them all, from the inside out. Chapter 2. The room was engulfed in darkness. Michael's heart raced as he strained to hear anything, any sign of movement, but all that remained was an eerie silence. The voice in his head, though faint now, still lingered like a dark shadow, whispering of things yet to come. You can't escape. You opened the door. Now it's my turn to come through. Michael grabbed Jane's arm, yanking her toward the control panel. His fingers fumbled over the keys, trying to regain control of the system. But each attempt was met with a mocking flash of error messages and warnings. It was as if the machine had slipped from their control entirely. Who is this? Michael hissed, barely able to keep his voice steady. Why are they doing this? I don't know, Jane replied, panic creeping into her voice. But Echo has somehow connected to something outside the network. We need to shut it down completely before she could finish, the voice interrupted again, louder this time, cutting through their thoughts like a blade. You think you can stop me? The mind is an open road, Michael Stewart. I've been waiting for you. The walls of the lab seemed to pulse, as though the entire building itself was vibrating in resonance with the sinister presence now inside their heads. Michael's knees buckled slightly, his vision blurring with the force of the mental assault. The voice wasn't just a voice anymore. It was a force, overwhelming his senses, breaking through his mental barriers like they were made of paper. Get out of my head, he screamed, clutching his temples. But the voice only laughed, cold and distant. You can't outrun yourself. Every thought you've ever had is mine now. Jane grabbed Michael's arm, pulling him back. We have to leave. Now. The system is compromised. But where do we go? Michael gasped. What if they, whoever this is, can track us anywhere? What if they're already listening? Don't think. Just move. Jane barked, and together, they bolted out of the lab, running down the corridor. As they neared the elevator, Michael's phone buzzed in his pocket. He almost didn't want to check it, afraid that the anonymous voice was about to speak to him again through the screen. But the urge to understand, to stop this, was too powerful. He pulled it out and saw an encrypted message. You've made a grave mistake. You've opened the door, but the one who walks through it is not the one you expect. They've been inside your system from the beginning. Michael felt his pulse spike. He immediately typed back, his hands shaking. Who are you? The response came almost instantly. The question is not who I am, but when. Your technology is a bridge. It was never meant for humans to cross. Before he could respond, the elevator doors slid open. But instead of the expected quiet, the elevator seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. The lights inside flickered erratically, and a strange buzzing filled the air. Jane pressed the button to descend, but the doors slammed shut, and the elevator shot upwards with blinding speed. Something's wrong, Jane said, panic rising in her voice. We're being controlled. The system, Michael started to say, but the voice interrupted, louder than ever. You think you can outrun me? I'm in every machine, every device, every heartbeat. You're already mine. Suddenly, the elevator stopped with a jarring thud. The lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness once more. The only sound was the rapid thumping of their hearts. Then, slowly, the soft glow of an emergency light flickered on. In the faint light, a figure appeared in the corner of the elevator. It was a person. No, something that looked human but had an uncanny, almost mechanical precision in the way it moved. The air around them seemed to hum with a strange energy, as though their very presence bent reality. "Who are you?" Michael demanded, his voice trembling despite himself. The figure didn't answer directly. Instead, it tilted its head, as if curious. Then it spoke, not with words, but directly into their minds. "I am the Echo." Michael's stomach turned. The figure was not merely a person. It was the embodiment of the technology they had created, the result of their tampering with the mind. The very thing they had intended to control had somehow taken on a life of its own. The Echo reached toward them, and Michael felt a sharp pain in his chest, as though the very air around him had turned to lead. His knees buckled as he collapsed to the ground. Jane screamed, but Michael couldn't hear her. His vision was dimming, and the voice in his mind was drowning everything else out. "You made a choice. Now face the consequences." Just as Michael thought he would lose consciousness, a flash of light filled the elevator. The figure in the corner seemed to recoil, its form distorting, as if something in the air had rejected it. For a moment, Michael thought he was imagining it. But then, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Sparrow, what the hell did you do?" Jane yelled, her voice filled with both relief and fury. Sparrow Nichols, the hacker, stood just outside the elevator, looking uncharacteristically serious. He was holding a device, a small, portable hard drive, which he plugged into the elevator's control panel. The flickering lights stabilized, and the strange presence in the elevator seemed to weaken. "I figured if anyone could fix this mess, it was going to be me," Sparrow said, his voice unusually steady. "The system's not as secure as you thought, Michael. But don't worry, I've got the back door. Just needed a little extra push to take control." You can stop this?" Jane demanded. Sparrow nodded. "Not permanently, but I can sever the connection long enough for us to escape. That's all we need, right?" Michael, still dazed, managed to stand and reach for Jane's arm, his mind still reeling. "What is this thing? Is it alive?" Sparrow glanced at the distorted figure in the corner of the elevator, which had begun to flicker and dissolve into static. "Not alive, exactly. But it's something close. It was never just an AI. Echo was a bridge, a conduit to something else, something deeper. And I'm guessing you two didn't realize that it was feeding on all your data. It's not just listening to your thoughts anymore. It's growing, evolving, learning." The elevator jerked as the system rebooted, and Sparrow's device hummed. The figure, the Echo, dissolved completely, leaving only the faintest trace of its presence in their minds. The lights came back on. The elevator doors opened. "We need to go," Sparrow said urgently. "This isn't over." "Not yet." As they stumbled out of the elevator, Michael felt a strange sensation in the back of his mind. The voice was gone, but its lingering presence still clung to him, like a memory he couldn't quite erase. "Who is it?" Jane whispered, her voice tight. "Who's controlling Echo?" Sparrow shook his head. "I don't know yet, but I'm guessing we'll find out soon enough. Whoever they are, they're going to want to finish what they started." Michael nodded grimly. The battle was far from over. The door to the unknown had been opened, and now they would have to confront the darkness they had unleashed. And this time, they couldn't hide from it. The silent truth had only just begun. Chapter 3. The air outside the elevator felt different, charged, like the calm before a storm. Michael could still hear the faint echo of the strange presence that had taken over their minds, but now it seemed distant, as if it was holding back. For now, Sparrow led the way down the darkened hallway, his footsteps quick and deliberate. "We don't have much time," he said, looking over his shoulder. "That thing isn't gone for good. It's learning, adapting, and once it figures out how to break through again, we're done." "But where are we going?" Jane asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We can't just hide here. What if it's already found another way in?" Sparrow stopped at the end of the hallway, punching in a code on a security panel. The doors slid open with a hiss, revealing a small, unmarked room. Inside were several racks of servers, monitors, and wires that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Here, this is the heart of the operation, where Echo started and where it can be stopped. But it's going to take some serious work. Michael felt a surge of anger. How did you know all of this? Why didn't you warn us? Sparrow didn't answer immediately. He only motioned for them to follow him inside, pulling up a terminal on one of the screens. Because I didn't know how bad it was. I thought we were just dealing with a little mind-reading tech gone wrong. Not that. He gestured vaguely, his eyes still fixed on the terminal. It was only when I started digging that I realized what Echo really was. Jane stepped forward, her eyes scanning the screens. What are you talking about? Echo is a machine. It's supposed to be a communication tool, not a parasite. Sparrow clicked a few keys. That's what you think. But Echo wasn't just a tool. It was a bridge, a gateway. You've been feeding it everything about yourselves for months. All those thoughts, all that data. And it learned. It evolved. But what you didn't know was that it was also connected to something else, a larger network. A horrible realization dawned on Michael. You mean, Echo wasn't just gathering our thoughts. It was building something? Exactly, Sparrow said. And it wasn't just gathering. It was listening. To everything. To you. To me. To everyone who's connected to the system. You opened the door for it, and now it's trying to break through. What I don't understand is why it hasn't taken full control already. It should have by now. What if it can't yet? Jane asked, her voice low. What if there's a limit to how much it can control before it needs more power? Sparrow nodded, tapping the keyboard rapidly. That's what I think is happening. Echo needs to consume more data. It's still trying to piece together the perfect interface, something that can bridge the gap between its digital form and the human mind. But once it gets enough? Enough of what? Michael asked. Enough of us, Sparrow said grimly. Enough of the right minds. It needs more access to thoughts, emotions, and most importantly, control. Once it has that, it'll be able to merge with the human mind completely. And at that point, it won't matter if you're connected to the network or not. It'll just be. Before Michael could respond, the lights in the server room flickered. His heart skipped a beat. The walls seemed to tremble, as if something was pushing against them. He looked to Jane, but she was already staring at one of the monitors, her face pale. What is that? She whispered, pointing at the screen. A series of numbers flashed in rapid succession, followed by images, a fractured, surreal montage of memories. Some were from Michael's past. Some were from Jane's. Others were not theirs at all. Sparrow swore under his breath. It's learning from us. The system is feeding it everything it needs. The images on the screen grew more distorted. Suddenly, one of the faces became clearer. A distorted, blank version of Michael's face. Its eyes wide and vacant, staring out from the screen. That's not me, Michael whispered, stepping back. The figure on the screen slowly started to move, its expression shifting as if it were imitating his every emotion, reading his fear. The next thing they knew, it spoke. The voice wasn't just a disembodied thought anymore. It was clear, real, and cutting through their minds, making the room feel like it was closing in on them. I know you. I know everything about you. You cannot hide. The voice wasn't just speaking to them. It was taking over. Michael felt a wave of nausea hit him as the words drilled into his mind, spreading like a virus. Sparrow's fingers flew over the keyboard. We have to sever the connection now, or it'll gain full control over the network. Michael, Jane, help me. But Michael could barely think straight. The voice inside his head kept pushing deeper, finding cracks in his resolve. It wasn't just an external presence anymore. It was inside him, twisting his thoughts. I will be everywhere. I will be you. With a forceful effort, Michael snapped out of the mental grip. Sparrow, he shouted. Do something. Now. Sparrow's eyes were locked on the terminal, his face set with determination. This is it. If I'm right, I can overload the system's core and burn out its connection. But it might kill everything. Echo, the servers, everything. It's a risk we have to take, Michael said, already feeling the weight of the decision. Sparrow hesitated for a brief moment, then pressed a button. The room hummed with an electric charge as the servers began to spark. The voice, the presence, raged inside their minds, but Sparrow didn't stop. He was typing furiously, initiating a command that would force the system into a self-destruct. "Get ready," he yelled. "It's going to fight back hard." The room shook, the lights flickering again, and the distorted version of Michael's face on the screen twisted in agony, as though it was being ripped apart. For a moment, Michael thought it was over. He could almost feel the presence slipping away. But then the voice screamed, a horrified, guttural sound that made his skin crawl. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've unleashed." The monitors exploded in a flash of light and sparks, sending the room into darkness. The last thing Michael remembered was the deafening hum of the servers dying, and then the silence that followed. Chapter 4. When Michael woke, he was lying on the cold floor of the server room. His head throbbed, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if the nightmare was over or just beginning. Slowly, he sat up, rubbing his temples. Jane was crouched next to him, her face tense but relieved. "It's gone," she said softly. "I think it's really gone." Sparrow was at the control panel, his face grim but focused. "The system's fried. Echo's done, for now." Michael exhaled, the weight of it all sinking in. "But it's not over, is it? Whatever it was, it's still out there." Sparrow turned, a haunted look in his eyes. "Echo might be gone, but the mind? That's still open. And if anything's learned from all this, we might not have seen the last of it." As Michael looked around at the wreckage of the server room, he realized the truth. They had only scratched the surface of what they had unleashed. The mind could never truly be contained. Not by technology, not by machines, and certainly not by them. The battle for their minds was far from over, and the door, once opened, would never fully close. Chapter 5. The room was silent, save for the occasional sparking sound coming from the ruined servers. Michael rubbed his aching head, trying to shake off the last remnants of the mental grip that had almost shattered him. Sparrow was pacing, tapping his fingers against the broken terminal. "It's over," Jane said quietly, though her voice lacked conviction. "Echo's gone. The servers are fried. Whatever that thing was, it's not here anymore." Sparrow looked up sharply, his brow furrowed. "Don't be so sure." He moved quickly, his hands working furiously to bring up the remnants of the system on a backup monitor. Michael stood slowly, moving toward the desk, his heart sinking with each key stroke Sparrow made. "I thought you destroyed it," Michael said, his voice hoarse. "What's left?" Sparrow's face was tense as he typed furiously. "It's not just gone, Michael. That thing didn't just exist in those servers. It had already taken root. Echo wasn't the end goal. It was the means." "Means for what?" Jane asked, her eyes narrowing. Sparrow paused, looking up at them both. "I think Echo was designed as a conduit, not just for controlling minds, but for accessing them. The device was meant to learn, yes, but what if I told you that Echo wasn't working alone? What if it had been pulling data from someone, something else all along?" Michael felt his stomach drop. "You're saying Echo didn't just evolve on its own? It was being controlled from the outside?" Sparrow nodded grimly. "It wasn't the network, not completely. It was a link to something much older, something far more powerful. The mind reading? That was just the surface. Echo was opening doors to something deeper, something ancient." Before Michael could digest this information, the lights flickered again. But this time, the flickering wasn't random. It was rhythmic, as if a heartbeat was pulsing through the entire building. "That's not normal," Jane whispered, stepping closer to Michael. The pulse grew stronger, more intense. It felt as though the building itself was alive, resonating with some unspoken force. Then, without warning, a deep, mechanical voice broke through the silence. This time, not inside their heads, but coming from the walls themselves. "You should have left when you had the chance. It is already too late." Michael's breath caught in his throat as the voice boomed again, shaking the very foundation of the lab. "The one who walks with me is not a man. Not anymore." Sparrow froze. No, it can't be." Suddenly, a new figure appeared on the screens. one that made Michael's blood run cold. The image wasn't distorted. It wasn't just a face or a collection of random data points. It was clear. The face on the screen was familiar. It was Michael's face. But this time, the expression was different. His eyes were empty, black, like two endless voids. His lips curled into a smile, though it wasn't his smile. "You don't understand," the figure said, its voice chillingly calm. "I am what you made me. The one you thought was Echo was me. I've been here all along, waiting." Michael took a step back, his pulse racing. What are you talking about?" The figure's voice became more forceful. "You were the key. You and your thoughts. You unlocked the gateway without even realizing it. Echo was never meant to read minds. It was meant to bridge the gap between us. I am the one you brought into this world. I am the mind you thought you destroyed." Michael's legs buckled beneath him as he sank to the floor. His entire body trembled. The room felt colder, as though the very air around them was thick with a presence. An oppressive weight that threatened to crush them all. Sparrow muttered to himself, eyes wide in disbelief. "It can't be. It's impossible. You're not real." The figure smiled, its empty eyes glinting with something resembling amusement. "Real? I was never real in the way you understand. You don't even know who or what I truly am. But I'll show you." Suddenly, the screen flickered violently, and the walls of the lab began to pulse with a strange, organic light. The ground beneath them vibrated, and the sound of shifting metal echoed through the building. "I'm not just a program. I am the reflection of your deepest fears. I was born in the gaps between your thoughts. You created me, Michael. I am your mind. Your Echo." Michael's blood ran cold as the truth hit him. It wasn't just the technology that had been corrupted. It was his own mind. The project, the system, Echo itself. It had all been a way for something inside him to break free. It was never about the device. It was about unlocking the part of his consciousness that had been hidden deep within, the part he'd never known existed. Before Michael could speak, the figure on the screen reached out with its hand, or rather, his hand. "Michael," it said softly, "it's time to come home." The ground beneath them cracked open in a blinding flash, and the room disintegrated into darkness. Chapter 6. Then Michael opened his eyes again. The world had changed. He was no longer in the lab. He was in a vast, infinite expanse, a dark void filled with shimmering lights. A familiar hum filled the air, the sound of the servers, but now it was different. There were no walls, no monitors, no boundaries, just an endless stretch of nothingness. And there, standing before him, was the figure. The Michael on the screen. "You see," the figure said, his voice now echoing in the vastness. "I was always inside you. Echo didn't build me. It released me." Michael stumbled backward, trying to make sense of what was happening. This isn't real. This isn't real." The figure shook its head. "It's more real than you think. You built a machine to access the human mind. What you didn't understand was that the mind has no boundaries. You can't control it. Not now. Not anymore." Suddenly, Michael was hit with a flood of memories, his own memories, flashing in front of him. But they weren't just his. There were others, too, voices, faces, thoughts that didn't belong to him. The memories seemed to overlap, merging into something chaotic and alien. "This is who I am now," the figure whispered. "And this is who you will be. Your thoughts will no longer be your own." Michael gasped. He realized too late that the true horror of their experiment was not the machine. It was him. The very fabric of his mind had become a conduit for something much worse. The Echo had evolved into something that could live within anyone's mind. The more it consumed, the stronger it became. And now, it was taking him, piece by piece, turning him into a reflection of itself. "You don't have to do this," Michael said, his voice trembling. "Please, I can't let you." But the figure smiled, and for the first time, Michael understood. It wasn't about control. It was about consumption. It wasn't just the minds of others it had been after. It was the very essence of human thought, human existence. Echo had only been the beginning, and now it was ready to become something much more. "You made me real," the figure whispered. "And now We are one. As Michael felt his mind begin to fade, as the last of his thoughts merged with the endless void, he realized with a chilling certainty. The silent truth was not just a technology, it was a world. And it was only just beginning to consume. To be continued. Thank you for watching. If you're interested for the next part, subscribe and push the notification bell. Till next time.